You to our webinar. I might have to start that again. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone. Sharing more love. On behalf of We Act for Environmental Justice and the Natural Resources Defense Council, I want to welcome each of you to our webinar, Stolen Futures, Communities Betrayed by Federal Funding Clawbacks, where we hope you will leave with tools to use, stories to share, and at least 3 calls to action if you care about the health and welfare of your community. And if you are here with us on this webinar today, I am assuming that health and justice are important to you already. Giving honor to my ancestors that have allowed me to work and advocate and enjoy the freedoms we still have today. My name is Dr. Jalon White Newsome, known as Dr. Jada Most, and I have worn many hats from my current role in academia to philanthropy and advocacy. However, this conversation is very close to my heart because during the Biden-Harris administration, I had the privilege of leading the first ever Office of Environmental Justice in the White House, where one of our key tasks with other core members of the executive office was to develop and provide guidance and support to execute the historic Justice 40 initiative, or Justice 40 for short. Now, I never assume that folks know what Justice 40 is, and that we might have a range of folks on this call where this could be your first time hearing about this initiative. It's all good. You will hear more about this from our speakers, but in general, Justice 40 was a commitment by President Biden and Vice President Harris to get funding, resources, and technical assistance to communities across the country that had been historically underinvested in and overburdened by pollution. The vision was that at least 40% of billions of dollars would reach community-based environmental justice organizations, finance intermediaries, and others to address the impacts of climate change, housing, water infrastructure, clean energy solutions, and other areas of focus. Now, the Justice 40 initiative was a game changer. It provided a pathway towards a future that would position communities to move beyond past and present harms to a healthy, sustainable, and just future, a future that all people deserve. But that future, many folks across this country envisioned that the Justice 40 initiative would catalyze, was brought to a screeching halt with the current administration. Unfortunately, a significant portion of the billions of dollars to operationalize the Justice 40 initiative that literally were in the banks or in the hands of community organizations across this country were canceled or frozen. The actions of this current administration have deferred dreams, put plans on pause, bragged about broken promises, and illegally ignored the shared visions of what could be the reality of restoration and resilience that all communities, low income, indigenous, communities with environmental justice concerns deserve. So you might ask, why is the freezing of grants and funds to support the Justice 40 initiative a big deal? Well, I think about our brothers and sisters at Alaska Community Action on Toxics, who have been concerned with the health and harms associated with environmental pollution from military facilities for decades. And they were depending on these funds to support projects that would address legacy harm, create new opportunities, and build resilience in the face of the climate crisis. Stolen funds, stolen future. We can talk about Green Latinos in Denver, Colorado, who have been working to increase energy and resource efficiency within the Denver metropolitan area through multiple projects. Unfortunately, enough money wasn't able to get through before the end of the Biden administration. So there's a chance the communities won't see the resources they were promised. Again, stolen funds, stolen futures. These are just a couple of examples that I hope make you real uncomfortable, make you concerned and ready to take action. So for our time today, our colleagues at NRDC, or the Natural Resources Defense Council, will provide an overview of an online tool that will give you a visualization of the status of federal grants, this country. Our friends at We Act for Environmental Justice will introduce a story map that uplifts the ramifications of these stolen funds. And after those brief presentations, we will hear directly from 4 community-based leaders about how this is affecting their work in real time. After which we will have a brief question and answer period, some quick closing comments, and a special surprise at the end if time allows. So without further ado, I am excited to introduce Ella Mendonza and Jada Larson from the Natural Resources Defense Council, who will share a newly created fund tool, visualization tool. And then after Ella and Jada, Tally Natter from We Act for Environmental Justice will share the powerful story map that uplifts the real voices and the real impact of these stolen funds. Ella and Jada, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. J, for that warm welcome and all of that context for some of the work we're going to be talking about. As folks know, or as we'll share with you, NRDC has been working with community-based partners and environmental justice partners like We Act, like EJNCP, to push for federal programs that would really address the root of environmental injustice in communities across the U.S. Like the EPA Community Change Grants and other key grants that we're going to talk about that are shown here on this map, these centered community-led projects, not just traditional top-down funding. They went to the root of what communities and people dream for in their own neighborhoods rather than was directed at a federal level. So in 2023, we began by providing comment to the EPA to help shape these grants and then offered technical assistance to well over about 300 partners as they applied, many for the first time, to these federal grants. To have community-based organizations or some of the CBOs really awarded dollars that were transformational, that could transform communities into matching the vision that residents have to solve longstanding pollution, sanitation, extreme heat, flooding, wildfire issues. That was historic. But come January 2025, the Trump administration began to decimate these programs that communities had spent months and in some cases, well over a year applying for. So why we really wanted to have this conversation, share these tools, is to make sure that communities have the information and can see how these terminations, these freezes, these cancellations would impact them and how this is impacting communities all across the US. And that's why we created this map. So let me go ahead and pass to Jada, who actually developed this map. Here we go.
Thanks, Ella. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So this might take 1 second. All right, I should be sharing. So this is NRDC's webpage that houses the story map. I'm just going to scroll down to, oh, sorry, not story map, dashboard. The dashboard, and if you want to make it larger, you can just view it on Tableau Public, which is where I'm going to navigate to. So the dashboard looks at 910 grants and subgrants across all 50 states and territories that would have provided $37.1 billion in awards. Today, 29 billion of those funds have been unlawfully canceled or frozen by this administration. So we looked at 12 grant programs, 10 of which are directed to the community level and 2 at the state level. Each touch critical issues like air pollution, lead in water, asbestos in homes, extreme heat, community engagement, and building capacity for deeper environmental health and environmental justice work. So you can review the grants on the map by hovering over programs. It shows the amount awarded, the awardee, how much was spent, the status if it's in progress, canceled, or frozen, and a project description. So you can scroll through the different programs, move between them. For example, the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator shows that all the projects are currently frozen. Same goes for the National Clean Investment Fund. All these projects are frozen, which in this case means that the administration has terminated the program, but there is still active litigation to access the funds, which are held by a third party. By contrast, the community change grants are all canceled, which means that the projects have been terminated by this administration. but all the grants are distributed by EPA. So once those were terminated, the grants funds are now fully inaccessible without a binding legal decision otherwise. So the grant data, I'm just going to press the reset button, comes from the EPA's Next Gen grant system with grant expenditures coming from spending.gov. You can see more about our methodology at the information button in the top right corner. Location data is based on the location of the lead applicant or statutory partner, but if the awardee is out of the service area, then it's based on the project location. So you can see you can filter by the state and by the congressional district. So I'm just going to give an example of that. The option to filter by projects by congressional district is included to show a snapshot of projects in a region, but it cannot fully show the widespread reach of grant funds across U.S. communities, especially for statewide or nationwide grants. I'm going to just reset again. So you can look at just projects that are frozen or canceled by changing the status filter, and you can look at different tags. For example, I'm going to navigate to clean energy, and then it just shows clean energy grants across the country that have been canceled or frozen. So resetting again, you can also filter down to more specific levels, looking at, say, air quality, farming, transit, and just explore projects that way. The last thing I want to point out is the option to look for specific grants by grant awardee. In this case, I'm going to click out of all and then just search for a region, and that project will pop up. Resetting the data for our last time, I'm just going to direct people's focus to the bottom right corner where you can look through specific programs grants that were developed in partnership with We Act partners. So you can click through the slides and see different grants. All right, so that is it for the dashboard. I will pass it back to Ella and stop sharing.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways we wanted to work was to collaborate and integrate with the We Act StoryMap, and so I'll pass it over to Tali. Thank you so much, and thanks, Jada, for bringing us through the map.
Thank you, Ella and Jada, for sharing your amazing dashboard. I'm now going to share my screen and present the story map that we made as a companion to the dashboard. So what we aimed to do with this story map was to add a human and story-centered approach, because when you look at those high numbers of millions and billions of dollars, it's hard to internalize what that actually means. So we created a story map with interviews from 9 different community leaders across the country to hear their stories regarding federal funds through Justice 40. So here are some of the leaders together at a convening that we held through We Act's Environmental Justice Leadership Forum. And I think someone will put the link to this in the chat so you can read it at your own time, because there's a lot of great stuff in here, but I'll just quickly scroll through it. So what we aimed to do was highlight the real stories behind these grants. So in this tab, Justice 40 Brought to Light, you can navigate to different projects and stories, and you're going to hear from these leaders momentarily. So here are some of the stories that Dr. J mentioned earlier, where these are real community solutions developed by community experts to fix problems in their own community. And as Dr. J mentioned, this was historic funding that took a lot of time and years of collaboration from EJ movement leaders to develop solutions for the problems facing EJ communities across this country. This was historic funding that was earned, applied for, and you can read about these amazing projects that were being developed. So this historic funding that was lost is all featured in this story map. But not just that, we tied together some other threads throughout these interviews where you can hear from leaders not only about how historic the funding was. So we have this quote: "This was the first time I felt they were actually listening." So we can learn about the history of Justice 40 and also some of the lessons learned. We need a real plan moving forward. We need to plan not just from political administrations, but how can we keep EJ funding and keep these solutions moving, depending, regardless of who's in power and what administration is ruling. Because what we learned through these interviews is that EJ is not going anywhere. So here's another quote: "We're not going anywhere with or without the money. EJ will continue no matter who's in power, no matter what federal funding infrastructure there is or is not." And if you read the story map, you'll hear about these meaningful collaborations across countries. Going back to this map, you can see we did 9 different interviews, and it was wonderful to hear how these different communities were working together and collaborating despite having different environmental justice concerns. What was so incredible about Justice 40 is it brought leaders together to collaborate and learn from each other. So I hope you take the time to go through the story map and read some incredible quotes and learn more about not only what was lost, but what was built throughout this process and the bonds that were forged and what community solutions are going to be developed for the future. And most importantly, the final section is called Take Action. And we provided some opportunities to share these stories, tell your own stories, use the dashboard, contact your elected officials, and support and donate to the organizations that we featured. So yeah, now I will pass it to the actual community leaders to tell you more about the projects that they developed and their experience with Justice 40. So I'll send it back to Dr. J. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ella, Jada, and Tali, for, again, the powerful partnership and how your use of mapping will help us move to action. Now we will hear from our 4 powerful community leaders to briefly share their story and the real impact on people and how not getting the funding and grants they were promised actually short circuits the vision and threatens the health and well-being of these communities that need and deserve to be invested in. So we will start with the amazing Cheryl Johnson, Executive Director of People for Community Recovery in Chicago, Illinois. Always a pleasure and a blessing to be in your presence, Ms. Cheryl. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. J. Hi, everyone. Just as they said, my name is Cheryl Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director of People for Community Recovery. It's an organization that was founded by my late mom, Hazel Johnson, who is known as the mother of environmental justice. I live in Allgale. Allgale is a public housing development on the far south side of Chicago that was built in 1944. And it was one of the 4 public houses that was built in Chicago for returning veterans, World War II veterans, African American, to come back. So this is a neighborhood where you have to have some veteran status, or someone in your family had to have veteran status. We moved out here in 1962, March of 1962. Actually, I was just 1 year old when we moved out here, so I have never lived anywhere else. I'm currently a resident in this community. This is a community that I know all my life. Allgale Gardens is an isolated community, but its neighbor was a lot of industrial facility, particularly around the steel mill industry. Many people in my community, Allgale Gardens, believe it or not, even though it's public housing, but it was a working class community. We never knew that we was poor in public housing as growing up until we became in our adult age, until we seen the closing of really the steel mills in our community. And when the steel mill particularly closed in our community, the environmental graveyard began to surface in our community because they closed without any kind of environmental remediation. And considering that, as my mother called our community, the toxic donut. We're like in the center of the donut, and outside the parameters of the donut is all these different types of industries that pollutes our air, water, and land. So that's why she labeled it to put it in short terms, because we have over 50, she was able to prove that we had over 50 documented landfills in our community and over 350 different type of industrial facilities that affected our air, water, and land. And that was the reason why she called our community the toxic donut. So when the industry closed, the economic status of my community started to change. It went from a working class community to a fixed income community. And when that came, there was a lot of disinvestment in the education system, the recreation systems, because Allgale was a self-contained community that was really viable, that had resident has their own business in the community. We no longer today have any of those businesses. The population in our schools went from high school graduation from maybe in 1,000 to maybe less than 200 currently today. So in our community, with the opportunity that we had to, and it was at one point my community was planned through the Chicago Transformation Plan in 2000 to be demolished. Our organization fought to save it because we feel like housing is a human right issue. And just because we have lived in an area that has been environmental contaminated, but we had the opportunity to be able to come up with plans to say, how do we revitalize this community? So over the years, our organization has been fundamental in the removal of asbestos and lead, PAHs in our community, those harmful chemicals in our community. But we also was able to force the closures of facilities that was not in compliance with their air permits in operation. We just as recent as maybe 4 years ago, we was able to prove on the south side of Chicago a class of environmental racism where they wanted to take melter shutters from the north side of Chicago, a affluent neighborhood, and build it in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, the southeast side of Chicago. So with our grant, there was a proposal to demolish one of the very first schools in our community. Mind you, when we fought against the demolition of Allgale, we also went to protected status to allow it to become a National Historical Site. So all our buildings in our community is protected under the National Historical places in the city of Chicago, in the state of Illinois, and it's national. So the school building was the very first school building that was built in 1944. This grant, the Justice 40 grant, gave us the opportunity to organize to fight against that demolition that was going to occur about 3 years ago in our community. It also gave us the resources to be able to hire residents to help do community organizing, to pressure our local government for the demolition of the building. It also gave us the vision to, like, my mother always had a vision in her whole life. She always seen this building as an opportunity because it's been vacant in our community for nearly 40 years. But she always wanted to see this building to be open, as she called an open environmental lab, where there's relationship between government, community, business, and the community, solving some of the environmental problems that we have in our community regarding air, water, and land. So when this opportunity came up, we fought against it. And now PCR, our organization, have complete ownership of this vacant building as of August 4th. So we want to keep this vision of Hazel Johnson, and we're naming it the Hazel M. Johnson Institute for Sustainability and Environmental Justice. So this is and we went after the community change grant, and we put together a $20 million proposal to be able, and that was going to fund a complete renovation up and get the building up and running. And taking this fund just changed the whole dynamics of this opportunity to restore this building, because that's never in the history. I've been working for People for Community Recovery 40 years this past August. Never have I seen any opportunity given to grassroots communities like mine, the opportunity to go after federal grants in that amount of resources to be able to revitalize our community. And to see that just wiped away, it was devastating. It was hard, but growing up in this movement where there wasn't any resources, it didn't really truly impact me like it impacted the other, because I grew up in the era when environmental justice was not even a term. I mean, there was never even an office of environmental justice. And even being president, my mother received a gold medal from President George Bush Sr. for the work that she did on environmental education and outreach, and to get to the point to experience going through the executive order 12898 with President Clinton, and to see Biden coming up with all these other ones and just see this just wipe away. You know, I feel for all of us who are impacted, even though I'm impacted, but it's don't hit me there as the core, because our resources was never dependent on government anyway. So I would just end right there, and I just feel for everybody, because I was happy for everybody to get that opportunity, you know, to be able to say, wow, we're doing something good. The government is really seeing what we've been fighting for years, and to see it's just taken away is just so heartening.
Carol, and you might have to mute the sound. That this change in dynamic has been devastating.
It's devastating. It's I mean, even though that I'm used to that fight. Maybe I should say that. I'm used to rejection. I'm used to not having something and fighting for the equality for all of us, equal environmental protection for everybody. So to see that just taken away, you know, and people work real hard. And it's not just about our community. What we do in our community affects everybody. It affects the globe. You know, it's not just limited. So, you know, just hold our buckles, y'all. We're going to go through some hard times, because, you know, we're experiencing that with a lot of climate conditions.
Yes. Yes. I feel like someone needs to mute. Thank you, Ms. Cheryl. And we're going to, again, appreciate you sharing your testimony. And we're going to keep on going, because very, grateful to introduce Janelle Wright. She is the Environmental Justice Programs Manager at the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance from Atlanta, Georgia. So Janelle, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Dr. J, and thank you also, Ms. Cheryl, just for the history that you relayed to this entire audience. So hi, everyone. My name is Janelle Page Wright. I'm representing West Atlanta Watershed Alliance on Muskogee Creek land in Atlanta, Georgia. So our community is made up primarily of working class Black residents who live near impaired waterways in 3 watersheds: Utoy Creek Watershed, Sandy Creek Watershed, and Proctor Creek Watershed. And our highly collaborative and participatory work is in the watersheds because it encompasses this built environment and this pollution that happens across these landscapes, and that impact on the natural environment and the quality of life of the people who live in those watersheds. And so what has made these watersheds impaired is historic sewer and stormwater infrastructure, crippling infrastructure that has really led to recurring instances of flooding throughout the communities. And our communities also face what researcher Hernandez calls the trifecta of insecurity. So housing insecurity. In residents across the city, many legacy residents can no longer afford to live in the neighborhoods they grew up in and are displaced. Food insecurity. And so we see many communities and many cities across the US live in a food apartheid state. And so hyper-local food systems addressing that can really look at how to shift that state. And then finally, utility insecurity. So we're seeing high energy bills, cities all over, and we're experiencing this in the city of Atlanta as well for various reasons. So we see legacy residents and many others are overburdened. And in these and many other ways, we see extreme heat. It's another work that we focus on through our community science efforts within community. And Wawa works in ways to monitor these local conditions in order to generate actionable data for community change. And so with Justice 40, we've seen this in various ways. The City of Atlanta and other organizations, environmental stewards such as Eco Action, who we partner with, longstanding, Green and Youth Foundation, and Trees Atlanta, received federal funding towards green space improvement projects. And so We Act supported with their support, we invited Kayla Moss, our EJ fellow who's in the audience, to dive into what the statewide funding that the state of Georgia received and what that would produce. So planning funding specifically was awarded, and the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, also known as Georgia EPD, created what they call the Peach State Voluntary Emission Plan. It's a mouthful, and it's that way because to steer away from certain climate language. And so they also created what they call the Low Income Disadvantaged Communities Working Group, which we are a part of. And they're also actively working towards a few feasibility studies addressing some of the issues in that Peach State Plan. And so the working group, which is now called Community Stakeholder Committee, their call to action, our call to action was to really communicate what was a part of this Peach State Plan. And since it began mid last year, a lot of the initial communication to us was really using some more inclusive language. But as the months passed, we would see those shifts, see those changes away from that inclusivity. And we see this, you can see this reflected in the story map, but also in our campaign materials. And so also during that time, unfortunately, there were many months in which this working group did not meet. There were 25 organizations at the height of it. And so because of that loss over time up until this year, we saw several leaving 4 community organizations. And these are community-based organizations across the state. And so unfortunately, vital organizations across the state may never see the data that was shared in this plan, but also how to connect these feasibility studies to real lived experiences. And so there is one silver lining in the partnership of that work. An organization called GreenLink Analytics, who's working with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, is developing a community benefits analysis as well as some implementation pathways for that Peach State Plan. But essentially, it's sort of really up to us to really kind of make sure that accountability is held in those 4 community-based organizations that remain within the LIDAC, the Low Income Disadvantaged Communities Working Group, the Community Stakeholder Group. So to wrap up, really from the end of last year to the beginning of this year, Wawa and other partner organizations that we worked with spent countless hours applying for federal funding grants. And these opportunities would have enabled more self-determined futures and built more community-owned data. And, despite this setback, we're utilizing our agility, our creativity to really continue to ensure that present and future statewide, hyperlocal and local regional processes are really involving more co-leadership, building out more bottom-up strategies, are communicative, and also in just inclusive or of more valuable qualitative data, which we hope to see in those studies as well. So we have a long way to go in our state. However, the efforts of Justice 40 accelerators, of those roadmaps and the like have not been done in vain. So that's all my statements, and I look forward to hearing everyone else's. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Janelle. And I think we can't get time back, but I love the spirit of moving forward and the silver lining and everything that you raised up. So thank you and Wawa for your continued work and your partnership. Now, representing Poder, People Organized in Defense of Her Earth and Resources, is Carlos Piñol, that we will hear from Austin, Texas. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Carlos Pignon. I'm the Resilience Program Coordinator. At Poder, people organize in defense of Earth and her resources. A big thank you to NRDC and WEACT for inviting me to speak alongside what I would say are real luminaries in the environmental justice movement and reflect on a difficult time, not only for us, within the organizations who were steeped in this Justice 40 work for years, but of course the communities whom Justice 40 was meant to benefit. I've been at Poder for 2.5 years now and have known our executive director, Susana Almanza, since I was a student at the University of Texas in 2018, but our organization long precedes me. This year actually marks our 34th year, and throughout all this time, we've worked to address harm to environmental and human health in East Austin specifically. Our co-founders, Susana and Dr. Sylvia Herrera, were born and raised here. Historically, the site of Austin comprising working class Latine and Black communities due to a history of segregation baked into the city planning. And so since 1991, Poder has run victorious campaigns against polluting facilities who have come here. These, are not ever on the east side by chance. It's all by design. And they include like a tank farm that was housing, I think, oil for 6 major companies in the Go Valley neighborhood, a power plant and a metal foundry in Holly, and a waste management site actually in Johnson Terrace, just to name a few. I'm noting these because, the neighborhoods I mentioned do not actually look like the neighborhoods Poder fought for back then. Once the facilities cleaned their messes up and it finally became desirable to live on the relatively inexpensive east side, the area became a developer's playground, pricing out communities built, over generations and altering the entire fabric of East Austin. I think this background is important because, despite decades of displacement, we followed where people have gone. Most especially Montopolis, a neighborhood that we've worked in for the last decade or so. Montopolis has been shaped by Latin and Black communities with more than a century's worth of history that has been sort of like woven by like Mexican migrants in the establishment of a freedman town, Burditt's Prairie. And so in 2021, the median family income there was actually 32,000 for a family of 4, which is about a third of the citywide figure. And as of 2023, the poverty rate was 26.4. What's also important to note about the neighborhood that we work in is that it's 4 miles southeast of downtown Austin. So of course, it's kind of facing the same influx of development and the resulting displacement of its longstanding communities. But it is like one of the last places near the core of Austin fighting to maintain its character. And so this is where we are. The working class Black and Latinx communities of Austin are the communities that, we've served for 34 years and serve to this day. And so regarding all that, from the very beginning, we knew what projects funded by the Justice 40 initiative could mean for our people. It marked a total shift in the way that, the struggle for environmental justice was not only considered by decision makers, but in how they were actually willing to remedy the environmental injustices dealt toward us. Well, that had actually never applied for federal grants ourselves. We actually did it until the EPA Grant Makers Grant came through, and that would have been going through Texas Southern University for Region 6, but that fell through. We actually use this opportunity to leverage, I think, the resources that the city has. And so today, the one I'll focus on is the EPA grant, the Solar for All. That was actually applied for by Austin Energy on behalf of Travis County. The application went through, I think, through a coalition of 5 different counties in Texas. And so it really would have made like waves. That grant successfully went through. And it actually was informed by a lot of the work that Poder was doing even before the Solar for All grant was announced. Of course, in 2021, Winter Storm Uri hit here. And then again, another winter storm called Mara in 2023. And that actually resulted in, power outages for weeks, so many deaths, and of course that hit disproportionately in the east side, where the grid is, often failing us, and also where there are more elders, more working class communities. And so that was kind of already shaping the way that we were thinking about the need for clean energy, the need for a reliable source of energy, and the need for a cheaper source of energy too. Because, all the while this was going on, the utility bills were also increasing. And so that was something we had a long process kind of undergoing, with the city. Had a meeting with the city manager, kind of gave him a proposal that was, I think, loose enough to where it kind of shaped the way that Solar for All came together from Austin Energy's end. And it kind of also forced, I think, the city to realize that, you know, Justice 40 or like the grants that they were going to apply for through the federal government were not at all going to be possible without the presence of grassroots organizations and with community-based organizations. And so it's been, yeah, pretty devastating in terms of that, like the Seller for All grant came in, I think, last year. And so there was a long planning process and a long process of figuring out what implementation would actually look like. And so there is a big blow, I guess, from imagining what could have been. The project was actually supposed to bring 20% savings on electricity bills by funding residential solar installation for just over 2,500 low-income households. And add over 3,000 subscriptions to the already existing solar community program, which also resulted in the same amount of savings. But beyond, I guess, this immediate material impact, there could have been, I guess there would have been the more intangible impact of solidifying the relationships among grassroots organizations and our local decision makers. In the past, we've been lucky to have, you know, our allies in the city departments, even before Justice 40 came along. But it was significant to us that the only way for the city to acquire this funding is through like the communities themselves and through our input. You know, their applications and proposals were only made possible with letters of support by grassroots organizations and also with a real robust like stakeholder engagement process written in. And so to me, this would have been, I guess, an avenue to ensure like our seats at the table with officials who make decisions that shape the way that we sustain our livelihoods and keep them accountable to us. So it's been devastating, I guess, on multiple levels, and also disheartening to see, I guess, many on the other end of this. And I mean, through the city, like surrender a bit now that the money has just kind of fallen away. I think that's kind of where the work lies for us. And of course, like this thing is really important to like sit with, especially when something, you know, it feels like something is happening every day now. But our organizations and our communities can't afford to be complacent. I guess sorry, I see that I'm out of time, but last thing I want to say is that, you know, I'm fortunate to cut my teeth with others who have done this work for decades, you know, who understand what it requires to sustain a movement for the long haul. And so even though this is kind of an unprecedented moment, I think that I'm still thinking about, you know, where we are today and how we move forward, especially with the tools that we're presented with today. You know, with this particular future, you know, taken away from us, how do we reclaim it, or, you know, how do we create a new one? So thank y'all.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Listen, it is devastating, but it's obviously everybody is sustaining. So again, our last speaker is the dynamic Paulina Lopez, Executive Director of Duwamish River Community Coalition, coming from Seattle, Washington. So Paulina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. DeLone. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm always grateful with We Act and, of course, NRDC for putting this together, to be surrounded with amazing leaders on the panel, but also attendees who, one more time, shows the need of what we had here in the collective as organizations serving environmental justice communities. My name again is Paulina Lopez, she, her. I work as an executive director for the Duwamish River Community Coalition here in South Seattle. And I have been the director for the past about 5 years, but engaged with the community for, of course, more than 20. Our regional country is Ecuador, where I always did as well social justice and indigenous movement. Located on the Duwamish territory, the first people of Seattle, to whom we honor all the work that we do. And our mission relates everything to maintain our ancestors and all the practices that they have in the only river that Seattle has, the Duwamish River. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit of our organization, which was born when our river was declared a Superfund site, the only Superfund site in the area. There's only one river in Seattle, and so surrounded by more than 1,000 industries that, of course, are living next and came after our neighbors here in South Park. The majority were here from the immigrant and refugee community, starting since the very beginning. So every day when we walk around the neighborhood, we share the space with these industries. Some of them are good neighbors, some of them are not. And those are the works that have been reflected, how we see the impact that they've been having by having them as neighbors, but also being in the middle of 3 highways and having 2 airports on our way around us, east and west, as well as the many different impacts that brought the communities of the Duwamish Valley to be 10 years. It used to be 13, now it's 10 years of life expectancy different from other neighborhoods in the Seattle area. If you may think, Seattle is a very green and healthy city, it is. I think that Seattle has been working towards some of progressive policies for the longest time. But when it came to the environmental justice, really, it wasn't the work that they represented in the different administrations here. It was mostly taking care of the environment, which is important, but not of the people that is around those environments. So when we started developing more policies and more work towards bringing those environmental justice policies, we started developing health impact assessments, cumulative health impact assessments that really show all these impacts that communities like ours are suffering, showing the highest asthma hospitalization rates, of course, showing the lowest tree canopy again, and showing our historic lack of investment and our red lining that has occurred for the many, many years and bringing communities that couldn't afford anywhere to live. So that's how we started to work towards all these issues, centering the voices of the people that are impacted directly by all these cumulative impacts. And we developed, a youth leadership program that we'll be talking more, by the way, plugging in on the EJ forum tomorrow, and talking more about how to center the youth voices. We also started bringing more policies that are benefiting everyone really in Washington state, as we wanted for the state of Washington to recognize environmental justice. So that move, and now we have the HEAL Act, that is one of the few states that have, in collaboration with our partners Front and Center, and other many organizations, environmental justice, that is being growing the movement. And that's how we felt really empowered by being heard through Justice 40 and getting so together with groups like We Act, Deep South Center, and many of the organizations here that are represented, and how finally we're being heard, and we have finally are hearing from the right investment that we needed to have long due that was, but also not only the money that was going to bring the communities, but also the status of the communities and how this was bringing into the importance of hearing our voice, the importance of having us as leading the movement, creating this collective that was so important, and acknowledging and respecting all these people and all the different humans that are being impacted, and so many of them have unfortunately have very poor incomes because outcomes because of this. So how we started to see it was a response of all these different movements, and so it felt very different until the new administration came. We thought we were going in the path that we deserve for the longest advocacy efforts, and so many respect for the people that starting advocated way before us, bringing also some of the illustration of how we can come as community, and being creative and presenting projects that are driven by community participatory research. That is something that we know how to do. We know how the impact goes, so we will know how to make and turn the curve. So that's what was most exciting about bringing the funding to respect all the people's desires and the people's work, because we work on the ground, we live on the ground. So that's the only way that we could do, by allowing this youth, these people that are being impacted, to drive the change. So wait a minute, I'm going to drink a little tea because my voice is failing me today. So something that we started to prioritize is bringing community around and along with us to help us drive the changes and the effort. So we started organizing these toxic tours. In fact, we organized some with We Act, and we wanted to hear and put it on the table. What is the priorities for people? What would we need to concentrate on, and bringing alongside more of the other organizations that would be interested in joining to the collective here in Washington State. Most importantly, we wanted to encourage and tell people how important that is this funding that is finally coming. And in a way, you know, that it felt that the movement was rising at the time of, you know, we were moving as we can to propose, to bring, to bring the solutions that we wanted to see, to finally bring this community-led, centered, and all the projects that we were expecting from community. So we were able to, in one specific example, we have one of our projects called the DAISY projects, which is trying to bring, because as I mentioned, asthma is a big issue here in our community. So we wanted to make sure we work with our families to make some improvements in this and do community participatory research on that, do some home visits and talk to community asthma impacted neighbors. And we realized we started, you know, to grow, and we had the funding and for reaching out to more than 100 families. And we just being told that the funding is not there for us anymore when we started already the project. And we started building the trust from community. We started building, you know, the leadership of community. So that was hard. We're still looking for the best ways that we can continue. We haven't lost the hope, because that's what people right now don't realize, that we've been through this before, when we have been uplifted, but then we've been put down, and then we rise stronger. So the hope, I don't think we have lost. We are continuing to building the movement in a stronger way. And this is the type of doing it to show that, you know, we know as communities we have, I love the organization for Carlos Poder, we have the power to continue, because we know what the realities are. We know what we sustain us, and nobody's going to help us, not government, except for ourselves. And that's what we need to continue doing. We have the ways that we can continue being strong, bringing all those private foundations that they need to step up, all those private funding that they need to be vocal, to finally support in the best way to communities like ours, because we've been ready, we're ready. And so we just need to continue showing the best way to do it. So thank you, everyone. The time is always short, but I'm always grateful. Sending the best of my regards to you all.
Thank you so much, Ms. Paulina. And again, please, audience, show some love to all of our panelists. We are running close on time, and so I'm going to ask our panelists to respond with a 10-second response to this last question. What do you want people to do as a result of this conversation today? So I'm going to start with you, Janelle.
My 10-second response is use your voice. There's a lot of power in your voice.
Thank you. Use your voice. Carlos.
I think join an organization and, you know, get involved with the grassroots.
Thank you. Ms. Cheryl.
Believe change will come. Continue the environmental fight.
Thank you. Ms. Paulina.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you all. And what I will say is, without a doubt, just from listening to each of you, and I hope folks in the audience feel the same way, is that while this current administration has been very successful with delaying and freezing and stalling progress, what they have not been able to steal is your voice, your grit, and your will to fight for justice. So again, to my virtual family, I hope and pray your fire has been lit. Now is not the time to be quiet, but to push the powers that be to return, release, and restore funding to the organizations that were promised these resources. So again, 5 quick actions. And hopefully you all have a pen and paper because I want you to remember this. The first one is to carry the torch. You need to share these stories, share the map, and spread awareness about why it is critical to get these funds back to these organizations. Point number two, I want you to commit to pressuring Congress to restore these funds because, as you heard, the health and welfare of people and communities depends on it. Number three, if you're with the media, I need you to share what you've heard, to reach out to our panelists, get the real stories and the real deal, and make it plain to the world what is happening right now. And for those of you, number four, that need legal assistance, there'll be something in the chat. Lawyers for Good Government and the Environmental Protection Network are there for assistance and support. So reach out to them. And last but not least, number five, consider supporting an impacted environmental organization. As all the folks have said, folks were doing this work way before they had funds. But if you heard the vision and the promises and the plans that were in progress, having funds will make it easier to do and move the work for justice. So again, it has been an honor and pleasure to host this conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to Ella to close this out. Ella?
Thank you so much, Dr. J. And I just want to spend this last few moments thanking y'all. You've heard the call to action. And I think it's easy with the scale of what we're seeing to say, okay, is there hope? But you heard it. I think, Paulina, folks, these communities have the hope. They're going to do the work no matter what. So we need to join them there. So I want to do a thank you to our wonderful speakers, Ms. Cheryl, Carlos, Paulina, Janelle. Thank you all so much. Dr. J, for not just leading us today, but for the work you've done to get these grants possible to make this conversation real. A huge thanks to Jada and Tali for developing that amazing story map and our amazing grant dashboard. And I just want to thank everyone who's here today. We hope that you will carry these stories on. I know it is feeling scary out there, but there is hope in what we do together across our states, our communities, to tell this story. And each one of you has the ability to have your community, talk to your electeds, talk to your neighbors, tell the stories. And as you see, folks' contact information is in the chat. Please reach out. We have obviously resources that we can share with grantees, but more than that, we want to make sure that you hear not from these grantees, but also from folks who have been impacted across the US. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Wow, and we are at 1. Thank y'all so much. And we'll drop our contact information in the chat. Please again, and let me also thank our amazing partners at WeAct. I'm sorry, I like working with them so much and pretending we're like actually at the same org. Thank you again, Tali, Manny, Ashley. You have just made this such a joy. So thank y'all and have a wonderful rest of your day. Okay, I think it's just us, right, y'all?
I think there's a couple people still.
No, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people still.
If anyone has any questions, please just drop them in the chat and then we'll have our contact information. If you don't have it, feel free to email anyone here and we'll share that broadly. Okay, great.
It's going to spotlight you three in every meeting that we have from here henceforth.
I was like, you guys can stay for us to really just for me to just talk about how much I enjoy working with WeAct, but I don't know if anyone has that amount of time left in their day.
We can close this, right? And just hop to the Teams thing that's been open.
Yeah, I think we can, I think we've given time, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna
All right.
close it out. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.